Great, I'm going to call the meeting to order. I'll start with a roll call. We have Steve Whitnick, Bridget Powers, Rebecca Hansen, that's me, Bill Bolton, Chris Buckley, Marianne Barnsley, and Brian Murphy, Town of Plymouth staff. We will then move on to a review of the minutes from our meeting and public hearing on May 16th, 2019.
I just noticed that we have Jack in the roll call, but I don't think he was here at that point.
No, it's
He's just still hanging
templates
around.
again.
Yep.
Yes. You can't keep a good man off the board.
Any other comments, corrections in the meetings, the minutes?
I have one on page 3. Let me try to remember what this all means. Don Bouchard, question by the town of. All right, so the third paragraph down from the top, it says Chris Buckley said that normal operation would be during normal daytime hours. See that where I'm at?
Yeah, unless there's an emergency.
Yeah. So that, I think that should say Don Bouchard said that, and then on the second sentence where it said he asked, then it should say Chris Buckley asked. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
And the other thing I just noticed when I read this, Chris Buckley called the meeting to order at 6:30.
Just noticed that.
Did I call it? Was
Templates
you not
again.
here on that meeting?
I was here for that one.
Yeah,
So I
yeah,
called it.
okay, all
Previous
right.
one.
Yeah, that was
All right,
me.
So,
Grab the gavel or something? Or?
Yeah, out of my,
well, and I thought my memory isn't as good as it used to. I thought, maybe, was I in charge of that meeting? All right.
Next time you ask that question, we're all going to agree with you.
Yeah,
right.
you don't remember?
It's all your fault.
Boy, you did a hell of a job.
anything else on the minutes? Or would we like to approve them as amended?
I would move that we approve the minutes as amended.
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
I just liked under public comments, everyone was very warm and wanted to leave.
Well, how about the side comments emerged, and the chair rhythmically tapped the gavel for order.
Those are great.
All right. I'm getting some static between my zoning ordinance and my agenda right now. Continuing implementation of the master plan. Okay. So everybody should have we have the use summary table. I just had these printed instead of emailing them around. I just thought maybe it would be easier at this point. There's not a ton to review on here. I also really like the name Gateway District.
I just took a stab at that.
Yeah.
Because when we talked about all three, Route 3, the two Route 3s and 3A last time, I then created that sheet. And it seemed like those are, and I read it to Frank at one point, but it seemed like those are entranceways, or in a lot of towns we call them gateways in. It may prove to be something else at some point, but for now, that seemed to be what was coming across. And they each have their own distinct character. So this just has the start of a purpose statement. It needs more work, and it might even need to break out how the three areas are different over time. So I just noted under district boundary what we talked about in my notes from that meeting. And in here we just have the existing zoning standards. So for dimensional and uses. So this we could add to the other sheets like civic and institutional and village commercial and all that. I have not done the single-family residential one yet, but I will with the
Okay.
notes that you sent to me.
Okay, and I'm happy
Yeah.
to help out with that too.
Yeah, it's not bad.
One correction on the minimum lot size in
please.
Gateway District. Private sewage disposal. Oh. Okay, never mind.
Okay,
I always think of private sewage as individual,
right,
not privately maintained. So
okay.
You're correct.
I just copied and pasted.
Yeah.
so-
no,
And I didn't spend a lot of time on formatting, as you can tell.
How about the gateway districts contain have been established? The first sentence in the purpose.
Yeah, that should be fixed.
What does it mean to say?
Should probably say have been established, not contain. And this is rough. This was, oh my God, I need to get this out to everybody.
Thank you, Steve.
As a starting point, this is not at all a finishing point.
And again, these are gonna be something that we have, to hand to, it basically summarizes each zone that will be handy for people that are interested in doing something in that zone.
And this still has more work to be done to it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the Gateway District actually is multi-zones as it stands today.
Yep.
Right. That's another important distinction. Yeah. So the other thing I did that you have as a printout was, I had in my notes a request to kind of do a side by side. So I just copied and pasted it from our existing standards, but without all the other districts, kind of as
Makes it
noise.
easier to see.
And I originally was going to do agricultural district and ICD and agricultural district and highway commercial. But instead, I just created one handout because I thought we may wonder, we'd be flipping back and forth between two. So these are the uses that exist now in these three districts. And it might be helpful if we're talking about the industrial commercial district tonight, to use this and kind of talk about how it is different. Is it that different from a use perspective? And then we can look at dimensional standards and the area of it and all that. And I put this together, did not spend a lot of time formatting, but I haven't actually digested the information to see where it's really different and where it isn't.
Yeah, I was looking through this earlier. I wish I had written more things down, but just interesting, some of the, I don't know, some of the things that require a special exception versus permitted use. All the civic uses that are all special exceptions were really, does the town or state or federal government have to adhere to any of our zoning?
No. No, we don't.
But we require them per our zoning ordinance to get a special exception for a number of things.
What's the P2, what's the
squared?
P squared?
There's just an additional, we can check it in our handy dandy zoning we have here, but there's like a reference to another part of the zoning that you have to look at.
And the P3, I think, applies to cell phone towers.
Okay.
And it
So-
just, yeah.
Yeah, the P2 is the ADU chapter in the
Oh, right,
zoning.
okay. So on the first page here, I mean, the difference that I see is agriculture has a whole bunch of different residential uses that are permitted. And highway commercial and industrial commercial have residential institutions that are permitted.
Interesting to me that you need a special exception in the ICD for a child care center, but not in the ag or the highway commercial.
Oh, yeah. So many of the uses in whatever we're in here, commercial, are just similar
Yep.
across the three.
The other thing that is, I had to actually use our definitions
Yeah, me too.
to figure out a few of these things, like the private club.
Yeah.
Interesting to me that it's special exception in the ag and permitted in the highway commercial. I guess I'm trying to understand, you know, they say like facilities and grounds, and I'm picturing like a spread, but special exception in the ag.
I mean, I think one of the things that we've kind of talked about a couple times through the master planning and leading into this is how a lot of the uses are similar in agriculture and in these two commercial districts. And you see it when you look under commercial uses here. Drive-through service, all three. Commercial service, all three. Little things like childcare center, like that you pointed out, but banks permitted in all three. When we think about the breadth of our agricultural zone, and we think about these focused commercial zones, it seems like that's something we could address.
Well, it seems like we're really opening up the ag for really sprawly development, and instead of encouraging more density in the
Exactly.
ICD.
And really not encouraging a type of housing that could work in some of the highway commercial or industrial commercial districts, where it might be upper story or more dense. That may be appropriate within proximity to jobs and proximity to services. But it looks like the residential side, it's more challenging because you have to go through the special exception process, which may not be too onerous, but it doesn't make it a clear path.
I think a lot of these are informed by the acreages too.
Okay.
Not only the requirements for a two-family home with an on-site septic,
Right.
plus recognizing that the lots or the parcels are larger in the ag zone. They're smaller in the highway commercial zone because it's essentially just paralleling Route 3. So there's not a whole lot of depth behind it, at least to the east. And, I mean, that's the only thing that I can see that would make them make these decisions. Also, kind of to tend to try and promote commercial uses of them over residential uses.
Right.
I don't think anybody to date has presented a plan for, say, retail use on Tenny Mountain Highway with apartments above.
But we know that's where we have water and sewer.
Right.
We know that's where we want to focus
That's where they
activity.
should go.
So what if the zoning made it very clear that that was something that was acceptable, that we wanted more density? What if like the harbor homes, I mean, maybe that wouldn't have been a good mixed use development. But if someone wanted to do something like that and have retail or office space on the first floor and apartments upstairs, do we have a preference? I mean, that's a great place for some density.
Well, the model is the village commercial zone.
Exactly, right.
So I guess it's just waiting to happen. We haven't reached the point of development yet where sprawl, I mean, that's a different conversation altogether, but the density in the zones other than village commercial is not the same. There's still plenty of land out there. There's ways to develop existing properties beyond what the footprint of the buildings are now.
I would agree, but I would say it's because of that, it's scattered.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So it
The
all
one
has-
informs the other, obviously.
Right, yeah. So we're scattered far and wide, and then we can still scatter more into ag right now.
I mean, we are short of affordable housing in this area, considering what jobs there are around here. So just knowing that and thinking about how Tenny Mountain Highway might get developed I think is valuable, so.
And we've yet to see the effect of students moving back on campus. It'll take a couple of years to start feeling that. But, we may end up with a surfeit of housing in the village.
Do we anticipate that I remember there's some new housing rules with Plymouth State that do they think there is going to be a excess of housing coming up soon in the?
If they follow through what they'd like to do and don't grant a lot of waivers to students, then yeah, you're looking at the freshman and sophomore being constrained to the campus, and perhaps juniors as well.
Up to 21.
Yep. Was their number up to
Yeah.
21? Okay, so it's juniors all the way down then for the most part.
Right.
Do they include a GPA as well?
Okay,
I think there's a GPA mix in there as well.
that makes sense.
Yeah, well, if they maintain their GPA while living off campus, they're allowed. I mean, that's part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, so that student housing issue can oscillate depending on who's in charge, right? So it could, as they go on campus, I think you're right, like we don't know what will happen to some of those units. They may go back to families or to, non-students. But then things could change again.
Right.
And then they could be flooded back into the neighborhoods. What seems to work really well here, for those of us that choose to live in and around the village, is proximity of residential units, whether they're above the shops, like above your store, or in the neighborhoods. And it doesn't have to look the same. It doesn't have to be the same mix of uses. But if we're going to have all these non-residential uses located out in Tenny Mountain Highway and have water and sewer, and we work with communities across the state that if they had water and sewer, they would do density well-designed with transportation options and sustainability in mind, and they would have focused areas of development that you would want to go to because you could do a bunch of different things. And hey, maybe you could actually visit someone that lives there, or maybe the people that work there also live nearby. Just gives options. And the zoning just presents an opportunity. The master plan definitely hit on that. But the zoning presents an opportunity to show the development community what that would look like. Doesn't mean it's going to transform overnight. Doesn't mean we're going to get a ton of growth or anything like that. I mean, so we also know we have a relatively low rate of growth in the area, but it may slow down the spreading out of low quality development. Single use, big parking lot, and then single use, big parking lot, single use, big parking lot, single use, you know.
And just a reminder that 6B on page 44 in our master plan does say, ensure that land use regulations encourage dense development rather than provide obstacles. This is specifically for Tenny Mountain Highway. Couple density incentives with lower impact development principles to ensure any increased stormwater runoff is addressed on site.
We made an initial move on that, Mr. Check the Boxes, by allowing multiple buildings on a single lot. this last
Absolutely.
time.
Is that hyphenated?
I expected to see the red pen come out, Chris, come on.
You know, one thing I keep coming back to, and this, when we did those focus groups on the master plan, I think the people that spoke were pretty emphatic about one of the things they liked about Plymouth and would like to maintain in Plymouth is open space. And as I look through the agricultural zone, what seems to be the most likely place to have open space, it seems like kind of anything goes. It seems like there's a danger that that open space could be, you know, degraded somewhat. And I, to me, it just seems something that's kind of important to keep in mind when, if we are going to change the zoning in the agricultural zone at all, or address issues in the agricultural zone.
I think that's important, and I think the agricultural zone, and because we'd already talked about highway commercial last time, but highway commercial and the changes we talked about, and then this ICD. The ICD and parts of the highway commercial have the infrastructure. They have access to the road, they have water and sewer. If we could take some of the pressure off the agricultural zone where the open space exists, but a lot of it is not conserved. And if we can make it clear, like, this is where we want you to bring your business opportunities and your mixed use opportunities. And so it wouldn't look like we're taking something away from agriculture, because why not give more density where it makes sense and have good design guidelines for integration of buildings and transportation and care of the natural environment. We can do it well. And we know we're not being overrun with applications, so we'd have a chance to even see how it goes and get feedback from applicants. But I'm with you in the sense that I think we need to shift the density and provide maybe some different tools in the agricultural zone or whatever it becomes, so that people have some flexibility. And there are a couple good tools for, especially if it's residentially focused and you want to allow for some subdivision, but retain the character and yet not price people out of being able to have a small lot if you want. We wouldn't want them all small because they all have wells and septics and all that, but I think we could accomplish that.
Development is very expensive, though. I mean, subdividing, unless it's, 1 or 2 or 3 lot subdivisions. But
Right.
if you're developmentally subdividing, we haven't seen one of those since Chatter Lane subdivision.
Exactly, yeah.
And the open space development up on Fairgrounds Road,
Right.
of which, there's postulated to be 50, 60, 70 units out there, and there are 2 now.
I totally agree, and that's the trend, is not going to go back to huge subdivisions.
Right, so
There's feature-based density, feature-based lot sizing, and there's lot size averaging. There are 2 things that DES has been promoting for a long time that towns just haven't been looking at. And the way that they work is they work best like at 4 or 5 lots or less. So we're not building roads. You don't have all those other things that you had on those examples that you cited. And the way it works is, let's just say in the agricultural zone we had a bigger lot size requirement. Well, with the lot size averaging, if Chris has 100 acres and he has to meet a 10 or 15 acre lot size minimum, he just has to average out to that. Well, he might keep 50 acres for himself because he wants to put some of it in conservation. And he might have 2 1-acre lots that could perk. As long as it averages out, that his number of lots would equal, on average, 15 acres, the math would work out.
How do they meet like the basic requirements for a septic system and stuff like that?
Right,
Yeah.
right. So then what you end up with is, instead of Chris saying, well, I'm going to have, 2-acre lots all up and down whatever road, he ends up with, 2 1-acre lots somewhere. And he ends up maybe with a 10 or 15-acre lot and a 20-acre lot and a 50-acre lot. And you can work with the features of the land, which is kind of cool. And the feature-based density is the same thing. It basically says like, oh, you have this big grove and a hill that you can't develop, or a wetland. Well, let's work around it, and you end up with different size lots, some shared driveways.
Protections are built into the deed for that property then.
Right.
And who helps the landowner? Because I could see where some landowners might find that a little onerous to think about, because it's not it's not what they're used to. Who helps them determine how to best subdivide their property?
And around here, it seems to be the surveyors. I mean, the surveyors are the ones that are doing this before they even come here.
Well, because they know what we require.
Exactly. So if we had a clear standard, and we could share it with them, and even as a draft, get their feedback, that would be valuable, because it's the same couple of people that seem to be doing most of the survey subdivision work.
Yeah, there's like 3 of them.
Right. I mean, that's my thought in the ag zone, because I think, like Brian said, we're not asking for really big, fancy subdivisions. We're not seeing them. So how do you provide some flexibility so that if I have a lot and I want to give a lot to my child and they can't afford more than 2 acres, I can do that, but I can keep the balance and meet the standard and still not get, if we have a 1 or 2 acre standard in the agricultural zone, every 1 or 2 acres that is buildable at some point could have a house on it. It won't be, a complete build out. I doubt that would happen, but it could be a lot more than people imagine.
Just a side note, as far as build out goes, we had a build out analysis done for the Squam watershed, and it was calculated at like 2158 under current conditions. I mean,
Right.
that's a long time away.
Right.
So
It probably was a scary image too.
it's always a scary image.
Big
Yeah.
gray map.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's a great idea.
Which one?
Like the
The feature-based lot
building out the
sizing
stormwater.
and the
Feature-based
feature-based
sounds kind of
density.
interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
So DES is promoting that?
They've had it out in their innovative land use handbook. They've had one of them. I think it's the lot size averaging. And there are a couple other examples of it. So it's something that I think would be worth looking at, even if we change the limits of the agricultural zone and change the name of it. I think writing the purpose statement, hitting on the points that Chris and others have made about the emphasis being on natural resources, like the master plan says, but allowing for homes and even home businesses.
Yeah.
Just maybe you don't want a Dunkin' Donuts on Bell Road or something. Which who's going to do that anyway?
That's
but-
what I was thinking of, actually. Using my property on Reservoir to put a Dunkin' Donuts out there.
Well, you may want to come back next month then. Right.
Better hurry.
But when we talk about, I mean, like every master plan, I'm sure we know exactly, but we talk, every master plan in the state talks about like preserving the rural character of parts of the town. And if we have rural character in any place, it is the ag zone. So thinking about, how, if that's important for us to maintain, which I think the work we did in the master plan definitely determined that it is, like, that's where we have to do it.
Right. I mean, this conversation has been helpful for me. I also agree with most of what's being said, so it's easy for it to be helpful for me. I mean, it would be really helpful if as we continue through this tonight, I mean, both to hear from other people but to have to explain this to Bonnie and see if she agrees, and then broaden the circle.
Yep.
And in order to do that, I think we do have to probably at some point really craft these purpose statements. So that if we were to tell somebody, what's the Gateway District, that we have a complete purpose statement that we could read. And I don't know, Chris, if this would be a place where you'd be willing to help us with the wordsmithing. But if we could explain what the agricultural district is, or give it another name and have a purpose statement, and then explain how it ties in with the commercial districts, like how they do what you just read from the master plan, kind of balance each other. I think that'll help people understand, and they may still have ideas about what we should do differently, but at least they can be informed. what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think just thinking about a place like the ag zone and people that might have large parcels of land that someday might have in their head that they have 50 acres and they're going to get 50 lots out of that. You know, just thinking of what that person might have to say and how, I don't know, just thinking about that.
Right.
They're gonna say oy vey when they see what they have to jump through to get those,
Yeah, the
even under
roads.
current
Right.
stuff.
Well-
It's very, very expensive.
But sometimes the taking is a perceived taking
Yeah.
from not being able to,
No, I
it might
get you.
not be a real thing, but in their mind, things like that are always easier to do when it's conceptual versus
Right.
reality, so.
Because the reality, being fairly familiar with the terrain up in most of the upper part of the agricultural zone, a lot of that isn't easily buildable. I mean, you know, like that giant chunk of property behind where I live, there's no way that's going to be, you know, like a grid of
Yeah.
1 acre.
Right.
It is, you know.
Maybe
But it-
think about steep slopes a little bit more too.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be a perfect thing to include in the purpose statement. Is just a description of the terrain and a description of the character of the district. Just like we want to down along Tenny Mountain Highway. If there are places south of Tenny Mountain Highway we identify in the master plan as having lots of more development potential, and we want to maximize that area so it complements the area we have here that is fairly dense. We have to tell people that in the purpose statement.
I have so much paper at this point, but I'm just trying to go back to those original questions that you had from talking
Oh.
about the zones.
Yeah, I don't think I have them with me. I have them on my computer. If I need to pull them up, I can.
I'm not sure if they'll be helpful or not, but
So how does that idea mesh with all these different uses that are permitted in the agricultural zone? No,
A lot of them wouldn't be permitted anymore.
because of feature-based sizing or feature-based density.
Well, if you're looking
This-
for it to be more natural resource and residential, and you know, why would you want to allow?
A drive-through restaurant.
Right. It doesn't fit with the description of the district.
And face it, the businesses wouldn't want to locate there anyway.
Right.
Right.
Doesn't make sense.
Where do you locate in Plymouth? 3A, 25, or 3?
Yep. Yeah, we've seen, for home businesses, we've seen a mechanic. So no one seems to object. People are going there. He's set up for it. He lives there. But we're not going to see a car dealership.
No.
Be an odd business
I
choice.
guess you never know, though, and I'm just thinking about the changes in modes of working. That seems to be rapidly changing with more and more people doing entrepreneurial ventures on their own as opposed to being, just trying to project ahead what that looks like for zoning.
Well, do we have just one tier of home business, or do we have?
No, just one.
So we could have two.
Yes.
So right now, can you have employees coming to the home?
Um,
Being really lazy, I'm looking to you.
Yes. I think it's limited in numbers.
Okay, I'm trying to get to your
Yeah,
point.
I,
20% of floor area, let's see, employ not more than one person who is not a family member.
Okay, because there are some towns. I think New Hampton's one that has two different definitions. So you have this tier where it's allowed by right.
Uh-huh.
Like you meet these standards, it's allowed by right. You're a home business, or you're a home something. And then there's another tier where maybe now I've built a barn in the back and I have 5 or 6 people that come and they assemble my jewelry or they fix
harvest my
lawnmowers.
hops.
Yeah, right. That's fair. So but all of a sudden now you have to go through the site plan process, I think. Like there are a couple additional hoops you have to do for
Yes.
that level of business. but it's not like you're gonna have a ton of people
Yeah.
going there. Like, maybe you're not concerned about transportation, or you're concerned about some of the other things that we tend to talk about here. So you could, I mean, we could allow for that within an agricultural type zone.
If you looked at what's not allowed in the home occupations, you can see that they had no idea. I mean, obviously the biggest threat were people opening home-based restaurants. Because there's tea rooms and restaurants and snack bars in there. But not mechanics, not woodworking shops, you know, things that actually generate noise more than traffic. And plus, there's a ton of businesses that no one even knows about.
That's what I was thinking too.
Office stuff.
Sure, people just develop a business after they've been established
But
in a
if,
place.
you know, it's also about the reach of the town. You know, if you're doing purely office-based stuff in a room in your home, we shouldn't have to be aware of it.
Right,
It's only when it rises to the point of public perception.
Right.
So,
signage, traffic,
Yeah.
noise.
right, you know, and that could be the thing too. Okay, you know, tier 2 is where you can get a sign,
Exactly, yeah.
you know.
Yeah, or number of customers.
Right.
You need parking. You have the occasional person coming to pick up your jewelry or buy your hops or whatever.
Right,
Right.
So, I mean, that's the kind of business that, you know, you see like the mechanic at Bell Road and Reservoir is a perfect example of that. It's pretty small, it's well-run. I've never heard a complaint from anybody about his business out there, either from perception, and he works by himself. This would enable him to have another employee. We saw one recently too with Dan King on Texas Hill Road.
Exactly, yeah.
So there's a guy who's, you know, he's running his shop. I haven't noticed any greater traffic flow on my property or cars speeding up, you know, checking the brakes or whatever, the shifting, like mechanics normally do. So, I mean, there's a guy who realized that home occupation didn't suit him because he didn't fit the parameters. So he got, you know, and maybe the site plan regs need to recognize that, okay, you can develop a public business in your home that is not a home occupation, but isn't market basket.
Right.
So the scrutiny of that would be more focused on effects on the immediate neighborhood and transportation than they would be on, you know, lot size or things like that.
I mean, I would rather see us do that than have to think about, like, do we allow an auto service station and a bank and a childcare center, you know?
The market dictates that, though. I mean, you know, unless somebody comes up with a completely out of the box idea about having a bank in, you know, the woods.
Right.
But, you know, I guess at that point, since we have nothing else now, it would be site plan review.
Right.
So there is, but
I even have it as a permitted use, you know, in the ag zone.
why is it permitted in the ag zone? Because the only way to get in or out of the ag zone is to take 3A, 25, or Route 3.
Right.
Those are, with the exception of Route 3, is all ag zone and ICD.
But now with the idea of gateway in mind, are there any other areas of the ag zone that make sense to allow a bank?
No, I think it would be restricted to, you know, we could even bring, you know, the state highway classification system into it.
What's a little bit scary about the way I think we have thought about the ag zone is it's the only zone where you allow a sexually oriented business, which is kind of weird when you think about it. Like, it's sort of like, we really don't care about that zone. So if we're going to have this thing that we don't want, we'll stick it in the agricultural zone and not think about it. And I don't think that...
That's interesting.
I don't think that that's how we should feel about the agricultural zone. I don't think it should be like a sacrifice zone where anything goes.
Or just this, it feels, and I think we've talked about this before, but like an afterthought. It's just the stuff that doesn't fit anywhere else, and it just has sort of
To
the...
be honest, this was a reaction to somebody who wanted to do stripping at Tenny Mountain.
Okay.
Came in immediately after that. I don't even think it was stripping per se, but dancing.
Right.
And, I mean, it caused a bit of hubbub in the town, and I think at the next March meeting is when we saw that. Because, you know, and I think it's a special exception use too, right?
Yes.
So they couldn't quite outlaw it all the way. I mean, they don't want to step on anybody's toes, but you can make it so difficult to get that most people wouldn't do it. I mean, obviously, you're going to do better with a bar downtown than you would at Ye Welcome Inn. You know, it's just the nature of the beast. You know, you got more of a population down here, and it goes back to density, like Steve was saying.
We don't permit bar, tavern / nightclub at all anywhere in the town.
Correct. But that's the state. You know, you can't call it a bar. So you have a restaurant with a bar instead. You know, that's state stuff.
I didn't think we'd end up talking about the ag zone as much tonight as
Yeah.
we have, but I think it's helpful, and in some ways, because we're kind of working around all these other districts to get to the ICD and Tenny Mountain Highway, I think if we have a better understanding of what everyone's shared vision is for these other districts, it might make it easier for us to then look at that district.
I think it's also with the ag zone, it's kind of, it's like how we have to compare how it's different from every other zone, because it pretty much almost does everything that every other zone does.
Duplicates.
There are obviously some industry, and there's certain things that are permitted in the ICD that aren't permitted in the ag, but it seems like defining the ag is also we have to define everything else before we can figure out what goes on there, so.
You know, and it might be a good time to think about the Gateway District as far as being bounded by state highways. You know, and perhaps the ag zone along Tenny Mountain Highway is out of date, you know. There's still, you can get to the ag zone from Fairgrounds Road, so you would just have a strip, you know, running parallel or, you know, around Tenny Mountain Highway out, and that's, you know, something else besides ag and ICD.
It's more like rural residential at that point.
Once you get around the corner, it is.
I'm thinking just even if we were to take away a lot of these, like the commercial permitted uses in the agricultural zone, and clearly we want to allow for agriculture, but it's always been confusing to people that it's called that, right? I'm sure you had to deal with that more than anybody. And if what we're talking about are largely residential uses, home businesses, forestry and agriculture, maybe someone can come up with a better name, but at least a rural residential zone is, I don't know, kind of captures it. And I'm not excited about that name, but I think it's closer for now.
I like that name.
Okay.
Has cachet.
It's found in 180 other towns.
Right.
Right.
Okay, just call it R2 then, Steve.
There you go, right, perfect.
But, you know, the ICD, and when people think of ICD and ag, you know, I'm not sure why the agricultural zone boundary along Tenny Mountain Highway was drawn as it was. Because it does kind of do this a little bit. It's not about proximity to the river, because it's not proximate until you get down, you know, more towards Sears. And, you know, yes, I can see it having been put in there to promote business on the higher ground. But as we've learned since it was written, you can't stop development if you're doing it in accordance with other laws around it along Tenny Mountain Highway.
Right.
So as it's been recognized that that's where there's the land, there, you know, we can house the larger businesses that are impossible to fit downtown. Promoting more of that, you know, and I think people would have to get through their heads that it's okay to drive through a commercial development to get to your neighborhood. You know, and, you know, some people may not think of that. You know, it's like kind of weird. You're going to worry about people wandering up your driveway, that kind of thing. But that's the way we've set it up to be developed out there.
Right.
You know,
Right.
we can make that zone greater or smaller, you know, in distance from the highway, depending on a road system that comes in on the other side. But one of the nicer features of that, and Bill, you well know, once you get a certain amount to the south on Tenny Mountain Highway, it goes up.
Yes.
So that's kind of a barrier to development there. So forestry would be the only thing that you would do there, and that's an intermittent type of activity. At least it's spaced out through the years.
Right.
The unfortunate thing about just modern development and, probably why the agricultural and commercial zone is so squiggly is agricultural land, true agricultural land, really is the easiest thing to develop. It's flat. And, so I think really a lot of what we're calling agricultural, once you get up to where it gets steep and, Texas, that's really not agricultural land in any traditional sense, whereas Tenny Mountain Highway really is. So, I think that's why that boundary is probably.
Right, and probably recognizes the agricultural uses that were going on at the time.
So the agricultural, so everything on Riverside Landing, according to this map, is in the agricultural zone.
Correct.
Yeah. That was a cornfield until not that
Yes.
not that long ago. Yeah.
Based on the conversation that just happened in the maps, so I did reach out to James at North Country Council. I have not heard back. If we can get those map files from him and I can get them printed, I think it'll be really helpful, because if we can use the maps from the master plan, especially when we look at the area you're just describing and think about, okay, well, what natural resources are here? What stream corridors are coming through? What wetland complexes? What steep rocky barriers exist? What's prime ag land? And think about, okay, well, in here, what makes sense? Here's where we have all our existing commercial activity. What should be the district? And use those maps to inform that conversation.
I can talk to Greg about, if you want me to.
That'd be great.
ask him. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll talk to him.
It's possible he has a copy of the maps.
What's really interesting is just thinking about the fact that the biggest development that we've seen in town since I've been on the planning board is on Tenny Mountain Highway, but not in the ICD.
Right.
And so and not necessarily making a commentary on what's happening on Tenny Mountain Highway, but that's something that happened in the ag zone. So technically that could happen anywhere in the agricultural zone. So just thinking, I think that alone tells me that, or makes me ask, what are we doing with the ag zone, and how does it need to differentiate from, you can't have an industrial complex in the ag, but there's a lot of things that are exactly the same as the ICD. And
Right.
is that what we want?
Right. Restaurants, retail sales, theaters.
And just thinking that the decisions that we make around this, or that the town makes based on the recommendations that we make, people are gonna, we've been living with a lot of the things that we see in our zoning ordinance for, half a century, so we might think that something like this won't happen here, but we're talking like these decisions could last 50 years, and we can't possibly, maybe we'll all be like, I don't know, mind commuting or something in 50 years. I don't even know what we'll be doing, but yeah. So so I think we can't just, if we want to preserve that rural character or maintain that open space, maybe there will be a Dunkin' Donuts at, everybody's house in 50 years. So we just have to think about maintaining that character.
The drones will bring it.
Yeah, or you just will it to come to you. And
Nobody will ever need
chip
to
in your
leave
brain.
their
Yeah.
house.
But there's,
Scary.
at this point, there's a lot of constraint on further development along Tenny Mountain Highway, just because of the proximity of the river. If you don't have an adequate piece of property that you can do Archimedes' law on, you can't develop it in the floodplain. So, that's what made the frontage that much more valuable, was because it was foolish to build closer to the river because of flooding. And now we found that, okay, you can move dirt around to build a building pad if you compensate, but it has to be on your own parcel. So those that have been developed, or others may not have the opportunity to do that based on that. And, there will always be probably stuff closer to the frontage that can be developed. But if you're within 500 feet of the baker, you know, your hands are pretty much tied on how you can develop that land right now. And things will probably only be more restrictive in the future, I could imagine, because, you know, look what the state has done with the Comprehensive Shoreline Protection Act. And since our ESC pretty much mirrored that when it was first put out, a little bit more stringent, you know, suited to the town of Plymouth. Everybody's comfortable with how that is workable at this point. So, I mean, you're going to have, that's also a barrier to certain types of development out there. So we will always have open space. I mean, we have the compensation basin behind Riverside Landing that can never be developed at this point in time.
It's a different quality of open space, though.
Yes, it's not wildlands, but it's certainly not ugly.
I wouldn't
I'm
say
looking
that
on
it's
the map.
undeveloped, though. I
Right.
think that is development.
But there is an opportunity there for, say, that, you know, Riverside Park Trail. I mean, and that's something
true.
I think we need to really somehow pursue in some way and make sure, because that is, you know, I mean, no matter who, no one's going to develop right up to the river, so there's always going to be, you know, a strip of land there. And, you know, I mean, we should definitely take care of that. And if there are, we should identify places that are so valuable that we don't want them developed. And that really, I think, is the purview of the Conservation Commission. And then if they really feel that way, it's up to them to somehow purchase or get it. Conservation, you can't just say you can't develop there. You know, it's up to them then to do something constructive.
I think that's important, and not to steer this conversation too much about, you know, land conservation, but the idea, like a zoning ordinances are not permanent protection.
Right.
So if there are area, and that's where I think a board like the Conservation Commission comes in, is they can be an arm that can help to permanently protect those lands, because zoning ordinances can always be changed. So.
I know we're like hopping all over the place, but it seems to be the conversation about the agricultural zone and the ICD are feeding each other and they're informing each other. I think, this has been helpful for me. I hope it's
I think this is interesting. Yep.
okay. So one of the things we see in working with communities that I see that's been playing out in Plymouth for a long time is if you zone a large area for commercial activity, then those uses spread out, right? They spread out to whatever land's affordable and easily developable, and you get a river landing here and you get a Walmart over there and all that. And the trend is continue to spread out with the lowest cost thing you can put up and the most parking you can put up until you've filled that space. And then tear all that stuff down and build density. So we just have to be aware that if we focus in on where the infrastructure is, but we zone an area that is way bigger than what our development pressure's for, we're going to continue to see that pattern. If we have a large area, but there are gradients of density, like around some of the intersections, we say, like, you can have a lot of density. You can get to the back of the sidewalk and you can go up 3-4 stories. And there's a reason why a developer may see a more profitable scenario for themselves. And as you move out, maybe it's, you know, a place that has big trucks and has like some of the other uses, like you said, that wouldn't work in the village. That's another thing just to think about. Kind of focus nodes of development that create places. And when you go into the southern tier now, all the big developments are not big box stores. They're all creating live, work, play places. Huge money coming into the state to create those kinds of places. And no one wants to create that kind of place next to a junkyard or an auto dealership, or there has to be some vision for it. So I just want to kind of put that, and that's where the form-based code piece would come in. It would be like, here, you can create a village of mixed uses and shared parking and all that. And then as you get out, yeah, you could still have a car dealership or whatever existing uses we have that we're happy to have. But it's just another piece of it. It's not simply just picking the district, because it won't naturally evolve.
Build in some kind of incentive to it, of
Right.
whatever type.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
And I really like that idea. In Riverside Landing, there's something about that that has some potential because there are so many different things here. But if we built like these developments like that as like separate, almost like little downtowns, if they function that way, we planted street trees that way, we had little open spaces and nice, enclosure and places for people to sit and multiple uses. I think those could be kind of cool spots, that would make people want to come to our town. It's not just another strip. It's like, oh, I can do a whole bunch of things here and then go back to that open space by the river and go for a run or, I mean, all of a sudden it's a destination and you can do a whole bunch of stuff. It's not, I'm just going to Applebee's to get lunch and then driving
exactly.
another 5 miles. Yeah. Like that's the kind of knowledge. I certainly don't have that kind of planning and so I'm very interested in how do you make that happen? Like how do you zone for that?
I mean, I think
encourage
first
that.
you use the resources we have and pick those locations. I mean, even if it's a newly developed place, you could say in the future, if this is redeveloped, here's what other density they could have, and here are the design constraints that they would have as well from the natural resource protection side of things. So we're going to give you density, but we're going to expect you to take care of your stormwater and have street trees and do those things. It would be helpful if we had those large maps. I think people would, for all of us, it would be much more interesting to say, like, okay, here's an area that is actually buildable. Like, we want to point people to do this in places where it would work. Has water, has sewer, it's at an intersection or a potential intersection. Let's see what this would look like. Let's look at examples of places that have developments like this. And would people be interested in this? And so I think if we went right down Tenny Mountain Highway, we could look at some of those existing developed centers and say, yeah, if somebody wanted to do things around that existing development or in place of that existing development, that would make sense. But maybe not right next to the stream corridor, or maybe not on the steep stuff that we know isn't going to be profitable.
I think
Maybe you end up with a couple of them,
I think a field excursion like that, to go out on the ground and see what's out there instead of just talking about it here. I mean, I drive out there all the time, but for some reason I don't notice the same way as like if we were really, really looking. I'd be open to that anytime.
I mean, what if we maybe started with maps and then went out? Did
Yeah,
both.
that would make the most sense.
I mean, if you could identify specific areas from the maps, then it would make sense to go out
Yes,
and walk.
yep.
So this, I don't know, is this too many moving parts? Oh, this is Frank.
No, good.
Because, we're also thinking about like extending Town West Road up to like Walmart that might open up a whole new developmental area, and on both sides that parallels Tenny Mountain Highway, and
I think that goes in with this conversation.
it does.
Yeah.
But, it's these are all kind of like moving parts that just haven't been like established yet, and that would change. If we look at a map and say, well, this is a nice place we also might be shooting a road through there, but.
Well, I think you try to coordinate it so that you know that if you were going to put a road across that area, that between that area and Tenny Mountain Highway, you figure out where some of these development nodes
Yeah.
are, right?
Right.
And then people can drive, walk, bike, whatever. You have safety services, accessibility, you have a way to run your infrastructure. And people, if that road doesn't get built for a while, it has to get in the capital improvement program and all that. If developers knew that it was planned for, they could start at Tenny Mountain Highway and start working towards it.
Yeah.
But Frank did have his hand up.
Well, talking about these maps, that's what I've been doing with the Plymouth State University, and I've got a linear map of the downtown area. And in order to do what you were just talking, you get the map and you start to subtract the environmental items and areas that you don't want impacted.
Right.
So you subtract either all of what's been already built, and then you start finding out what's left. And then you look at the types of businesses that would fit that profile to meet all of the permitting processes to successfully be there. And so we're getting another map for the Tenny Mountain Highway. And in respect of the Town West Road, the 1979 link between that and Yetton Road, which was proposed, but never obviously acted on. And that is a function of getting with all the landowners and seeing if they were open to allowing that corridor to be constructed. One thing we're looking to do is getting a drone to fly that course to see what part of the environment we want to save, because we don't just want to draw a straight line road.
Right.
You want one that's conformal to the unique aspects of the environment at the end of that, the southern end of the industrial zone. But those maps are available, and they're like 6 or 8 feet long. And, so that's what I'm doing for the village commercial downtown area, is identify the areas that are environmental impacts, environmental mitigation, flood zone systems, and then to see how I've talked to several of the landowners about purchasing rights of ways and trying to get this all put together so that I come to the planning board work session for this rezoning of the village commercial zone. Just what you talked tonight is basically the things we need to do for the village commercial zone. Those maps are available.
If we get the maps from Greg, could we do this at the August meeting? Like, I don't know that we'd pull it off in time for July, but could we look at those maps? Because I think if we could, we're making enough progress in talking about the different districts that if we could do that in August, I have a advanced class, 9 students. It's very similar to the class that worked with the master plan. That could get started at the beginning of September. They're going to need input, right? So, and it's good experience for them to come to some of these sessions. But they could start working on fine-tuning some of the things that we're talking about, and they could do a more detailed exploration of the mapping along Tenny Mountain Highway with our direction and show you case study examples. I mean, even if we were to all be in agreement here, we have to convince everybody else to vote. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of background to say, well, what would that look like and who else is doing it? Oh, that would never happen here. Well, it's happening in places. So I just throw that out there to be thinking about. And if we can, over the next 2 meetings, continue to refine these things, I think there would be enough to get them started, and then they could bring some draft stuff and we could ask them to look up specific kinds of examples.
And, you know, you're talking about an attractor, probably one of the greatest would be lack of administrative stonewall.
Right.
Make it easier for people to develop on the back road instead of in the highway frontage. So, you know, your density is one of them, you know, and parking, you know, you could work it where, you know, maybe you're not on the hook for all the parking for your building because you're there, you're locating with a couple other businesses to a greater or lesser degree, so you share all that parking with them. So it's not, the onus isn't on the one business owner. It's almost like a TIF district, but built around zoning instead of money.
It's with how the form-based code works. You just described it. Yeah. I mean, Somersworth has us looking at getting rid of all their zoning in the downtown and replacing it with a form-based code. And so we're going to go from this ridiculous number of permitted uses that we can't anticipate all of them, probably to 5 uses. And then it's the predictable process with the density and the things that make it financially feasible, but also have some requirements for design guideline, environmental standards. But say, hey, we want development to happen here. We're going to remove the barriers. Here's what our expectations are. Show us what you got. And developers like that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and if we could get it closer to what the vision is and we could accomplish the other things we're trying to balance here with open space protection, being fiscally responsible. I mean, really, a lot of this is like, why do you want to spread everything out and then you spread out all your services and that spreads out, increases your money.
Mm-hmm.
So is Somersworth being kind of like on the edge of like development future, or you know, what's the deal on that?
They're seeing it happen. They're seeing so much has happened in Portsmouth and Dover, who both
Yeah.
have adopted a form-based code. And they're saying, wait a minute.
Weren't you working in Portsmouth and Dover too?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, it's contagious.
Yeah.
But
Whitman plan.
but they're all, each of the four, and we're working in Rochester too, so each of the four are trying to differentiate themselves as cities. So they're looking at, whether it's their heritage or the arts and culture or having a younger vibe. But they're all working on their economic development from their own way. I mean, I think Plymouth, we've been trying to do the same. Like, think about how are we different?
Right.
Littleton's and Bethlehem are thinking about how they're different, and they're being successful with that. And that kind of goes beyond zoning, but zoning's part of it.
So Rochester has a younger vibe.
They have an incredible arts culture. They're trying to become the arts community.
Huh.
I'm really impressed. It's one of those places that if you just drive through, you don't get an understanding. I'm sure Plymouth's like that. People go through and they're like, cute town, but they don't understand all the things going on. A 2-hour tour of downtown Rochester, and I was like ready to go there on vacation.
Oh yeah.
I was shocked. They have more art spaces, performance spaces, cool restaurants. It's not obvious. Kayaking on the Cachiko River, beautiful wetlands, trail systems. Yeah. Sorry, this is not a commercial for.
Trader Canal.
This is my night off. But I think if we could show that, Tenny Mountain Highway was Village 2 or the Villages 2 or whatever, that there was, and it was for newer development, it was for more dense development. We have water and sewer. A lot of these other communities are struggling to do what we're talking about because they don't have that infrastructure. They're trying to do the zoning, and they still have to go out and find the water and sewer. We have it. It's right there. I'm Plastow, New Hampshire, down on the Mass line. I was there last night. They're trying to rezone Route 125. We're doing the master plan right now. They are sprawled out. And now the big box stores are starting to retract because of online sales. So all the big box stores are looking at potentially going away, and that's their bread and butter. So they want to do form-based code, dense, live, work, play. They don't have water and sewer.
Wow.
Yeah, so they have actually a fire suppression line that some of these businesses are getting their water from, and they have septic systems at Walmart and Home Depot and all these places.
Wow.
So if they knew what we were dealing with, we don't have the development pressure, but we do have the infrastructure, so it's a different challenge. But
Yeah.
I think if you create a good vision and you're putting the other infrastructure in as well, things take time. Rebecca will still be the planning board chair, hopefully.
That's the curse, right?
You soured your chairman.
Till 2158. More on this? I've taken some notes and I'll get my scribble to you I'll type it
Okay.
out.
I feel like I can't create, even like I did for the gateway, I feel like I could create one for the ag zone, like a start,
Yeah.
and put in what the permitted uses are and the dimensional standards. And we could start maybe crossing out uses that we think we want to eliminate, or adding uses if there are other uses. And I could bring that for the next meeting
Okay.
with the single-family residential. But I don't feel that I have enough information or perspective to start on the ICD yet. I think when we go through the mapping and all, it'll become a little bit easier.
All right. Well, I'll get you my notes and I'll
Okay.
at least get them so you can read them if there's any other ideas that you didn't capture in your notes.
Okay.
It is 7:30. We were going to talk about a little bit of Taskmaster stuff today as well. Are you prepped for that, or?
I could do that. If I could make a motion that I take a 5-minute break. If someone would second that, but I have to go to the bathroom.
No, go.
I'll second it.
And I could just do like one thing real quickly, and we could feel like we checked something off, and it would be a good,
Go do one thing quickly first.
Yeah. I drank a bunch of seltzer.
I can't wait to see how this pops up in the minutes.
I'll tell Don to concentrate on this.
Yeah.
This is how we get people to start watching at home.
35.
Exactly.
Right. So is there an economic development committee now up and running?
It is.
You say yes, but you shake your head no.
you know, like, Mike Ahern is, I think John is on it as well, but, it's kind of like, I think it needs better direction or better form.
It sounded to me like it was a bunch of downtown business owners met and then determined that they can't do anything until there's more parking.
Yeah. And, so then it got fractioned, then it was like downtown, Tenny Mountain Highway, and I think,
Okay. Different needs, different desires.
Absolutely.
yeah. But,
I'm the one, my program is economic development. It's called All in the Name of Plymouth, and I've rented an office up above Chase Street. And I'm basically evaluating, I've done an inventory of types of businesses and number of businesses on Main Street. And using the North American Industry Classification System, we have principal industries and then you have accessory industries that go with them. And the key is that there's a formula to determine the balance of the types of accessory businesses that go with our principals. So this is the part where I'm actually inventorying that types of businesses as for tourism, and then for what do we need to develop. And of course, the other thing I'm inventorying is the parking system for the downtown.
I mean, that seems like a priority, because there's not much vacant space downtown.
yeah.
And I have been one of the voices saying we don't have a parking problem, because we didn't have enough people parking, right? Now we do have tons of people parking. It's a lively downtown. It seems like the type of place that could benefit from a parking structure. Other towns have been through this before and figured out how to fund them. I can't even get a spot in the Green Street lot when I want one, because it's so full. But I don't, is anyone at the town level looking at the
Yeah.
finance side?
Finance side,
of a
there's also a
parking
couple
garage?
solutions too.
Well, you're doing it the wrong, backwards. We have the same piece of real estate that Concord has, River, Railroad, and Rockledge. The difference was that business community came together 20 years ago and said, hey, we have a parking problem, not of our own making.
Right.
They put a plan together, they got a $6 million garage at Eagle Square, and they're in the process of redoing their Main Street parking systems. We did this, we had our parking thing, I did the inventory 20 years ago, and everybody decided we didn't have a parking problem. At that time, 20 years ago, we had 115 businesses on Main Street. Our biggest issue is employee parking.
Sure.
If you take 2 people per business, you got 330 cars, and it's only 250 spaces. Somebody's gonna be disappointed. Now we have 170 businesses to Main Street to the Merrill Street. 170 and 49 buildings. And all those businesses have all employees that can't do on-site parking.
Right.
So the pressure's on to make our employee parking off-site, and that's the part I'm evaluating now. And so the problem is, of course, I had marked out or measured out on Green Street additional 40 spaces available, but I guess there's some technical issue about using those spaces because of who owns the property. I don't know if it's the town or water and sewer or whatever, but that's one of our issues. The other issues is land ownership, and the Green Street Route 3 isn't connected, and that is the biggest
Sure.
interference. Beyond that, our road system is the sidewalk connection, because once the people get out of their car, they're pedestrians. We do not have very good east-west connectability in the downtown area. So these are all things you have to inventory as you have it, plan it, and then go forward for an economic development grant that includes parking. Because you're not gonna get money for parking, you're gonna get money for economic development. That includes parking. That's what that's what I've got going.
Thank you. Did you asked the Economic Development Committee question? Was there more follow-up on that aside from, okay.
Yeah, it morphed from bringing in new businesses to keeping the downtown vital, and the number one thing was the parking.
Yeah. I sat in on a meeting for the Holderness Downtown Business Community last week. Mike Ahern was there, but I mean, same deal there. They, not much, I mean, it's a much smaller downtown, but same issue, employee parking and getting employees to park in the remote lots that actually don't really exist anyway, so.
Unfortunately, the town doesn't have a lot of vacant land in the downtown that we could devote for parking, and the lands that we do have are unsuitable for parking. So there would probably have to be some kind of a trade-off. I mean, we can develop a few, I mean, the idea is most bang for the least buck here. And so we immediately went down to the highway garage where there seems to be more flat space. And, you know, by amplifying the availability of parking along Green Street, and again, we gotta, somebody's gonna have to come up with the correct names for all the streets down there at one point in time. But, so that would be the paved road that leads past the kiosk lot, right? There could be more parallel parking in the senior center area. Plus there's the snow dump area, which would make a great seasonal parking area for stuff because, you know, it's flat and it's sandy. All we have to do is mark out the spaces and sell passes for it. But so that's where it kind of came from, and it's like we can only contribute so much. The business owners can only contribute so much, but how can you contribute anything if you don't have a place to put it? And to do a structure which one wouldn't fit in the downtown if it was anything more than one level, because a third of that structure is going to be taken up by ramps, so you're cutting down the parking. But you're looking at anywhere from $60,000 to $80,000 per space.
Yeah, the Main Street, do you remember the design that Tom Salmon did next to the Flying Monkey, when the Flying Monkey was just a movie theater? Yeah. And it had the complications that Frank already cited, you know, the land below Railroad Square. There's enough confusion down there that access to it would be challenging, but he had access from there and he had access from South Main Street.
Alex is looking at that again, because he owns the lot and the monkey and
Right.
the land behind it. So.
And we don't have a parking requirement for downtown businesses, which makes sense. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. But I learned today, it's just funny that we're talking about this now, that to get a permit on the paved section of Green Street, it's like $400 a year. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, you don't have to plow the area, you don't have to pave it, you don't have to do any of those things. But if you had to buy a few of those for your employees, granted, that's a huge expense. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then it becomes a question of apportionment.
Right.
Is it first come, first served? Do you do it by lottery? Do you by need? Numbers of employees? Somebody's going to be upset, no matter how we do it, and that's fine. We recognize that going in, but you'd have to make it as fair as possible. And you know, I'm not even going to touch that. You know, let somebody else think of that, because it's just rife with, you know, turmoil.
But I would imagine, and Frank spent more time thinking about this than anybody, and he probably loves when it comes back up, but I would imagine the problem doesn't get fixed. Then the solution is, okay, I still don't have enough parking for my business, similar to what the bank did. I'm going to take the building next door and take it down. I'm going to make a surface parking lot. Mm-hmm. And then you end up with all these gaps of surface parking lots, maybe in places you don't want, and maybe not nearly as nice as the bank did. The bank did a nice job, but
And curb cuts or, yeah.
Right. So
There are, right now, the other thing that's going on is a lot of these businesses that own, like Main Street Dental, has enough on-site parking to take care of their customers and employees. And they also, by agreement, take care of their neighbors, the business next to them. Now, there's a lot of real estate that's between the railroad and those buildings, that because of ownership, no one business could afford to have that land cleared, you know, the trees removed and do all the drainage, whatever, to make that real estate more effective. You would gain another 10 cars or so. That would be work for both businesses. But that's the kind of inventory that I'm doing now. There's a lot of behind the buildings area that I've talked to a lot of the business owners, and they say, yeah, this would be great. You know, if we could. They're concerned about trying to figure out how to engineer the solution of building this parking at ground level, and dealing with all of the engineering aspects they don't understand. But they've got the space. And I said, well, if we had a plan to develop this, all 5 of these businesses, would that be something you're interested in? Oh, yeah, but, you know, I as a business can't afford it myself.
No, but isn't Water and Sewer looking to upgrade the water and sewer line up Route 3?
Well,
Could it be rear loaded and
that's
done
another program.
at the same time?
You know, what we need to do is that's what I'm inventorying, is all of these various functions that are going on.
Right.
And like the water and sewers going down Route 3, the same time, you know, when we did Main Street going north, we moved the power lines, the telephone poles, to the back side of the buildings.
Right.
Okay? Well, that whole system is due to be upgraded. So now you have to coordinate the upgrade of water and sewer, the co-op, and the business community, so that when you're doing all this, that we're not overstepping and reconstructing something that somebody else is trying to do. That's the plan.
Makes sense. Do we give Chris enough time?
I'm not sure, because I think we also need to talk.
We have 3 more things. I'm
Yeah.
totally cool with, we could do this later.
I lost my agenda. Sorry, using this scrap paper. Yeah. Brian, do you want to do the announcements?
Sure, I got a whole bunch of stuff here. Just to keep you informed, the Holy Trinity Parish, Parish Hall rebuild, they relocated the handicap parking to be, it was originally shown to be in the center of the parking lot. It's not a very easily seen picture, but because the signage requirements would have interfered with plowing in the winter. So they moved them to the corner. Nothing's changed other than their location, but I just figured you guys would want to know. Doesn't require any other work on our part. Okay, so there will be some work on the US Route 3 over I-93 ramps A and B, done by DOT this year. And they are looking to start, let's see, work on the bridges may include pavement replacement, bridge deck repair, curb replacement, abutment repairs. But it's very little work. It looks like it's all occurring on 93 at that point. And let's see, we got a notice of regional, or butters for what I believe to be is a cell tower at, in Bristol, because we're in the 20-mile limit. I don't know, we can't see them from here. That's just statutory. Here is a copy of the letter announcing the regional development for Ambrose.
Great.
I sent them all return receipt. We've received them all back.
Okay.
Nobody's commented. And that's pretty much it for the announcements, I think. There was something that I can't put my hands on now. Some talk about the FEMA floodplain survey. Folks might see people out doing some measurements, but they'll all be identified folk. And it's all being done under the auspices of trying to get a better handle on how the rivers are working in this area. So it's under FEMA. And that'll be reflected in the floodplain development regulations that they hand out, and then on the firms. And that's it for me, Madam Chair.
I have one thing that just wanted to circle back on the idea of the site plan regs, subdivision regs, that we need to update those. Sounds like,
Absolutely.
even if it's an intermediary update, just to get some wetlands definitions in there.
Yes.
I think it sounds like what we need to do is just say wetland in our,
This, I did query the town council about that. It doesn't require public hearings, but it does have to be effected at a regular meeting, not
Okay.
a work session meeting.
Okay.
A public hearing meeting, so, and noticed it as such, that,
Okay.
you know, that you would be bringing that up. I haven't heard anything back concerning the lawsuit. I know that,
Okay.
I watched the arguments on the stream. It was pretty interesting. They kind of went this way and that way, and so who knows how they're going to rule, but at the
watched
very
it as
least,
well.
they're coming back at
Yep.
some point.
Yep.
Whether they're under marching orders or just we have to review it de novo, but
Okay.
we'll see
I'm
where
willing to
that-
take a look at both of those and at least just review what needs to get done, to make sure our intent is reflected in those regulations. There's also a couple tiny things in the master plan that I think just referring to certain town something that we could just do in one fell swoop without totally overhauling, which it is time to do that, but I just don't think we're gonna get to it in the time that we need to, this seems to be fairly important, so.
Well, since, I'm surprised that wetlands didn't show up there originally.
Yep.
Because as long as I've been in the state, it's been on everybody's radar. However, I think that, it's our litigious society. The language in the regulations was enough to draw a line from A to B. Now we have to be specific about what they are. So wetlands has to go in there as the word wetlands, since we have the definition in the zoning ordinance. That was the heaviest lifting of this. I mean, we could accomplish this in one meeting just by putting it in wherever the purview of the board, the responsibilities, just to add that one word.
Okay, well, I'm happy to take a look and then bring it to the next work session to look at, and then,
Okay.
so we could perhaps open them up for a public hearing in July, at our July meeting.
That'd be
That was-
great.
Yeah, I mean, this is a quick thing, but,
I think if we could do what you suggested, though, and to get to Chris's point of like making sure we're doing some of the other implementation of the master plan, just a quick read through
Yeah.
and flagging like these are the things that were also mentioned.
yeah, so it's.
Lot of sense.
Yeah, so then we'll have a whole lot of, Mr. Check the Box. Sorry, Chris. We'll have some things to check
What
off
does that refer to? What were you?
Because you were talking about
crossing
checking the
thing.
boxes of the low-hanging fruit.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yet we still haven't.
So, okay, so I'm gonna do my best to get that done. If we can do it July or August, I think that's good timing. So I will just, do my best to get in there, and I'll talk to you directly, Brian, to just any
I'll look at
specifics.
it too, and
Okay.
I'll give you my suggestions.
Okay.
It's a matter of starring, where we want to insert it.
Sure.
The other thing is we had some board circulated handouts today as well, board member circulated handouts, and I'm wondering if, Bill, would you like to present the, stream crossing assessment project in the Baker?
So of course I don't have my glasses with me, but actually,
Did you pass those out to
Let me hold
everyone?
it over.
well,
like
you
this.
will, actually, in fact, Lisa Donor, was also copied.
Oh, okay.
And she'll be bringing it up with the Conservation Commission. But Lakes Region Planning Commission is in concert with North Country Council, and
UVSLSRPC, this is like a,
Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission.
yeah, okay.
this is like an eye test.
So I guess they all collaborated to do a culvert assessment, and I guess they're all contributing funds to it too.
So there's a big move statewide to do a bunch of stream crossing assessments, and the idea is doing it in a way that collects information for DES, who's concerned about undersized culverts and how or culverts washing out and how they may impact water quality, fish and game impact, the impacts on aquatic habitat and organisms, Homeland Security for actually just infrastructure and protection of infrastructure, Department of Transportation, obviously for transportation networks. Anything more that I can't remember.
Local public works departments, or that wasn't on your list?
It wasn't on my list. I can't. Maybe there's just 4, but they're all interested in data from stream crossings and culverts. And instead of each of them sending out crews to collect information separately, they're just doing it in one fell swoop. So it's a bureaucratic marvel, really, that this is happening in this
Makes a
way.
lot
So
of sense.
And
yeah.
the assessment is the spring and fall of this year, or spring through, do they have the maps?
Yeah. So
We have the maps too.
field assessment is the spring and summer. Data analysis is fall. Community outreach, winter and spring 2020. So.
And it's on public lands. They're going to try to do private lands if they have permission. But- And for this particular one, it's Baker.
Cool. Would that be a complete survey of all the culverts in the town, like, for example?
That they could have access to.
I mean,
This one's just the Baker
Within the Baker
drainage.
River.
Just the
Watershed.
Baker, yeah.
okay,
But that'll be all along
Yeah.
Tenny Mountain Highway there.
yep.
That's neat. Steve, you brought a show and tell as well.
Yeah, can I borrow yours, actually?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. So this is an event that's being organized by Central New Hampshire Chamber of Commerce, the local Rotary, the Grafton Regional Development Corporation, and Pemmy Baker TV. But engaging community, they're bringing in this speaker, Peter Francis, who was at UNH. I don't know if he's at UNH anymore, if he's retired, but he was one of the people that wrote the book Communities and Consequences, which came out probably 10 or 15 years ago, and it was about the aging of the state. It was one of the first things to say, like, hey, New Hampshire, you're getting older, and now people are showing up and voting down school referendums or whatever. How are things going to change when there aren't people to volunteer in the fire department, or they're voting against all the things that families are looking for? And so it featured, in the book and in the movie, it featured a lot of examples from around the state. They're doing another one. They're coming out with a 2.0, which actually focuses more on how to attract young people to the state and some really cool stories of where that's happening in communities. I think it's more on the solution-focused end of things. So he's going to give like a 40-minute presentation, I think, like new trends, new demographics, new things we're seeing. He has a graph that's kind of blows your mind, like in the last couple of decades, the growth in population in the state, and it's like 30-something% is over 65. I guess it's good news. We're all living longer, right? But people are also retiring here, and people are moving away and not returning. So he's going to give an interesting presentation. Then we have a panel of people from as far north as Lincoln, as far south as Bristol. Just 4 people who are going to give some slightly different perspectives, either on finding employees, finding volunteers, housing, things like that.
It's too bad Littleton's not part of that then, huh?
It doesn't go quite that far, yeah.
Because they have some good successes.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. But this is going to be the type of thing that I'm going to facilitate it.
Wasn't there a movie, wasn't there
Communities and
recommended community,
Consequences,
it's available to watch beforehand somewhere?
I don't know. I think it was on VHS. The first, no, I think it was on, I think it was on DVD. I don't know if it's been put online, probably.
There is an hour video attached to the Facebook invitation.
I thought
There
that.
you
It was
go.
very good.
Then that's-
It was
that's
really
probably
good.
it.
So I'll have to
Yeah,
look
yeah.
back to the.
And did it have scenes from like town meetings?
Yes,
And it had Peter
exactly.
talking.
It was excellent. Explained the whole aging, and
Yes.
it was really good.
I think Mary Ann's here.
That it
But they're making a new movie on that, and they're looking at other examples. Yeah. So it'll be good. It'll be more timely. So I don't know. There could be 50 or 100 people at this. We're not sure.
Neat.
But I think it'd be nice if there were other planning boards up there as well that would go. I mean, this is the type of stuff that comes up at the state planning conference and other places, and here we are. It's going to be here, and it's free.
And that's next Wednesday,
Wednesday.
at the Monkey.
Yeah.
Next Wednesday, the 12th, at the Monkey at 7 p.m.
Great.
However, there won't be any parking.
If there were,
Wow.
Well, it's midweek,
Such a
so there will
comedian.
be more.
You can park in the bank.
You can park in my driveway and walk down.
Live downtown, walk, or arrive
Sometimes
early.
my filter doesn't work.
We've got extra
Oh, that's
bikes
why
at
we
our house. Any other updates from other boards?
no.
Not really. I mean, some really cool stuff, but not really anything that has to do with the planning board.
I'm trying to remember to do that, the other
Yeah.
board check-in.
And don't be jealous, but the ZBA hasn't met for the last 2 months.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, it just tells you that, nobody's asking anything weird,
Right.
so.
Or anything weird that the ZBA can address.
Right.
All right, so I think we'll keep thinking about checking things off the list, but we are checking things off the list, just not the tiny things.
I would make a motion that we. Jack's gone, so I have my job back.
We count on you. I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I
Aye.